In this lesson, you will be learning how to teach your child in isolation or all by itself. Is often one of the harder vocalic R's for kids to produce. Most errors will sound like a distorted or o sound. For instance, sister might sound like sista or sisto. The way to fix this involves proper tongue placement, holding the jaw still, and tightening up the muscles of the tongue. There are two basic methods for producing the R sound. The first way is the Retroflex method, where the tongue is curled back and up. The second way is the bunched R method, where the tongue is pulled back tight against the molars. For both methods, you can use the acronym TUB to remember. It stands for tight, up, and back. Let's discuss these in more detail. The Retroflex method is generally easier to teach, so I usually try that first. Tell your child to put the tip of his tongue up to the center of the roof of his mouth. So many people have kind of a slight bump up here near the ridge in the middle of the roof of their mouth, where the two sides of the palate join together when the mouth is being formed. So some people have kind of a bump here. If your child has one, it will be a great landmark of sorts to help your child know where to put his tongue. So the tongue would come up, straight up here. I hope you can see that. Sideways, straight. And if you don't have a Mr. Mouth puppet, you can always use a tongue depressor and show him in his mouth if you can, or you can get a light and shine it in your mouth and show him where yours goes. If you don't have a tongue depressor, you can even use a lollipop to touch that spot to show where it goes. So something flavored can actually help the kids to find the spot again by taste. They even make flavored tongue depressors. And in my experience, grape is the most popular flavor of tongue depressors. So first show him where to put his tongue and then let him try. Using a mirror and a small flashlight can help. If the tongue is curling up, you will be able to see the line of the frenulum on the bottom of the tongue. Don't want you to have to look at my ugly tongue, but here it is. You can see that frenulum is the membrane that anchors the tongue to the mouth. When a person produces Retroflex R, you can generally see that frenulum, that line going up as the tongue curls up and back. So try it yourself as you make the sound. And look in there and see. If you don't see it, then you are probably producing the bunched R, which is the second method to make vocalic R. Back to the Retroflex method. Once your child has the tongue in the right spot, have him vocalize while holding his tongue up there. So that's not an R sound. That's not the whole thing. And then his instinct will be to drop the tongue down and say os, but tell him, no, keep it up there, touching the roof of the mouth, even if it feels slightly unnatural. You kind of have to get used to having your tongue up there while you say that. The next trick is crucial. He needs to tighten up the sides of his mouth and tongue. So notice what happens when you do this. Your tongue will drop slightly so that it is still up there, but not making complete contact with the roof of your mouth anymore. And you're not necessarily consciously letting go. It just happens. So tell him not to try to move it down. Just let it happen, but try to keep your tongue up there. Again, tongue straight up, touching the bump or the middle of the top of the mouth. Vocalize, and then squeeze. Now, it's not like a goldfish or a W squeeze here. So we don't want ooh, ooh, or oh. We don't want the lip to come down. That's not good. Don't let him do that. It's going to be more like a square, or more like a square pucker. So try not to even move the top and bottom. Just let the sides do the work. and it's just a little bit. Like I can still make without doing it now, because I know how to make my tongue squeeze enough to do that. But sometimes kids, when they're first learning, it helps to tell them, squeeze the size of your mouth, and then they automatically squeeze the size of their tongue as well. So again, this kind of a square shape is okay for the retroflex R sound. Now I know this can be confusing because obviously anything you try to do with your mouth is not a true square. So notice the difference between when you make a sh sound and when you make a W, like a whoa sound. The sh sound should make your lips into more of an oval or square, and that is similar to what will be happening with the retroflex R sound. Only with R, your tongue will be tight, up and back, tub, So, is correct, O is not, And that is for the retroflex version. So again, practice having him put his tongue in the right spot and squeezing slightly while vocalizing to try to make the sound. He probably won't get it right away. But once he has the idea though, have him try slight variations of tongue placement. Tell him to try putting his tongue maybe a little farther forward from the bump, or a little farther back from the bump, or just slight variations, and see if any of those changes to sound more like a good sound. And encourage your child and tell him it was close if it was close. And then ask him, what did you do that started to make it sound better? So it's important for your child to pay attention to what they are actually doing that made the sound so that they can recreate it again. And if they can tell you what they did, that's a good sign. Another method for trying to do that retroflex R is to take your tongue, start out with an L sound, put the tongue up here behind the teeth, and then tell your child, let's pretend you have peanut butter all along the top of your mouth, and you're going to take your tongue and kind of lick the top of it to get the peanut butter off. And so start up here, and then slowly scrape back the top of your mouth like this. So as you get farther back, it's going to turn into that sound. Have him go really slow so that as soon as he gets it kind of in the right place, you can say, that's it, or stop. And then he'll know that, oh, that was the right place. And then have him try to do it himself and go back there again. So that was retroflex R. Now let's talk about the second method, bunching. In that method, the tongue goes straight back in the mouth rather than curling up and back. It goes straight back. It sort of squishes back into itself and becomes wide and flat, with the sides of the tongue squeezing against the back teeth. See if I can, I don't know if I can actually make this happen with Mr. Mouth, but instead of curling back like this, the whole thing kind of squishes back in itself and then squeezes against the back teeth, pushes hard. Again, you still have the tight up and back. It's just that instead of curling up, the whole thing is kind of lifting up like an elevator and going back like that. So the body of the tongue is higher up than normal and back farther than normal. And then again, the sides of the tongue are now squeezing against your back teeth. So I personally cannot produce R this way. I've tried, so I have to rely on Mr. Mouth to demonstrate. I can only do retroflex. So when you are teaching your child, tell him to imagine that his tongue is a bridge if you're teaching the bunched method. And so the bridge is now going to connect one side of his back teeth to the other, and maybe Indiana Jones or whatever the latest superhero is must get from one side to the other without falling down. Tongue is the bridge. So your tongue must squeeze tight against both sides to connect the teeth so that the hero won't fall. So at the same time that he does this, he vocalizes, so I'm trying to do it even though I can't, and produce the sound. You can again use a tongue depressor or a lollipop to touch the insides of the back teeth, showing him where to squeeze. And you can also touch the outside of his jaw here where his teeth are. And then you can, like I'm doing now, you can have him put his fingers there on his teeth, cheek jaw area, to feel it tighten up when he squeezes. So, he should be able to feel kind of the tongue muscle squeezing against the side of his mouth. So it can help to have him start with the E sound to get his tongue up and back, and then tell him to bunch it back farther for the sound. Ear. Also, it's very important for both types that the child keep his chin and jaw still. So you don't want the mouth moving all over the place like this. You want them to keep it still. Ear. You don't want R. If they're doing this, there's no way for them to keep it accurate. You know, if they're moving around like this, got to keep it still. If he has to hold it for a minute, great. Hopefully, eventually he can do that without the prompt of holding the jaw right here. Also, their mouth shouldn't be open too far. See how weird that sounds? So I tell my students to imagine if someone tells a dad joke that is kind of funny, but not really, and you're just politely laughing with your mouth only partly open, like, that's about how far open you want your teeth and mouth to be when producing the vocalic R sound. So don't be discouraged if it takes a while for your child to produce correctly. Some children pick it up right away, but for most, it can take weeks or months. The more your child practices and the younger he is, the faster it will probably be. The exception is very young children. They may not yet have the motor control skills to manipulate their tongue effectively, or the language comprehension skills to understand what you are asking them to do. But by late preschool or kindergarten, most children will be able to understand you well enough to work on R. If you want to mix it up with other sounds you're working on, that can help keep your child's attention. Also, as you are speaking, you can emphasize correct sounds in words when you're just talking on an everyday basis, like, what did you learn from your teacher today? That's a little exaggerated, or there's a blue bird. Remember, not all words are spelled with ER. That can be confusing for some kids who are learning to read. They may see the word and think that it is pronounced with an or kind of sound, ward. So it helps to go over that with older children who are readers, that sometimes OR can be pronounced And sometimes children can produce other types of vocalic R easier than they can produce For instance, I've had success starting with R, as in car. I will go over these other types of vocalic R in future lessons. When your child can produce in isolation with 80% accuracy, you can start on syllables like erb, and erg. For example, for instruct your child to get a good first, and then move the tongue up behind the teeth to make the final S sound. It actually can be really hard for the child, once he's gotten the sound, to be able to add on another consonant because it involves moving their tongue. And sometimes it's hard for them to get that initial sound correct because they're anticipating the S at the end and they don't get the first. So it's very important for them to get that first. Again, it might help to use a mirror in front of both of you, or to at least give your child a hand mirror to look at. Try to make it fun and rewarding, and reward your child for any effort to produce the sound correctly, even if it's not perfect. So it can help to separate the and the final consonant for a bit, and then gradually say them closer together until he gets it, like s, s, ers. So practice this until he can do it correctly at least 3 times, and then move on to the next syllable, like erd, and do the same thing. You may find that some syllables will be easier than others for your child to produce, and that's okay. You can come back to the harder ones later. So move on to as many syllables as you can, trying to get as many correct productions as possible. If your child gets discouraged, switch to a different activity, like trying to name as many items in the room that begin with as possible. You could also read a storybook that has a lot of words in it. When your child can produce syllables correctly 80% of the time, you can move on to initial in words.